Somebody's calling my name. Well, 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 Lord, somebody's calling my name. Well, 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 Lord, somebody's calling my name. Well, 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 Lord, somebody's calling my name.
Event, capping several days of virtual and in-person programs. Here are some of the highlights. At the gala, Representative James Clyburn spoke of meeting John Lewis when they were 19 years old. They attended a gathering with Dr. King and the leaders of the SCLC and SNCC on the direction each would take in their organizing tactics. Clyburn said that meeting set the course of his commitment to nonviolent change for the rest of his life. On Friday night, we heard the story of Vivian Malone as she integrated the University of Alabama. She is the youngest sister. As her youngest sister, Dr. Sharon Malone bestowed our Vivian Malone Courage Award to 1619 Project journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones. She said about her refusal of tenure from the University of North Carolina, Vivian walked through the door of an esteemed Southern university so Nicole could have the right to turn away from one. On Saturday night, we were schooled by legendary attorney Fred Gray as he broke down the elements of the Montgomery bus boycott, designed in a living room by two people. It was a masterclass in grassroots organizing. Throughout the festival, we heard the life lessons learned by teen environmental justice activists Jerome Foster II, Mary Kopeni, Naomi Wadler, and Isra Hersey. All of these programs and our festival films are available on the Eventive website, and we are extending the festival film recordings until October 11th on Eventive. So if you've missed them, you still have time. Go to marchonwashingtonfilmfestival.org, get a pass or make a donation, click and view. Here's the rundown for tonight. The director of the new documentary, My Name is Pauli Murray, is with us. Julie Cohen is a veteran filmmaker who was nominated for a 2019 Academy Award in the documentary feature category for her work on RBG, on the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and that's just among her many credits. My Name is Pauli Murray is available on Amazon Prime, and Julie will introduce the film's trailer. Julie Cohen.
Privileged to be here at the March on Washington Film Festival. As human beings, we all contain multitudes, but I think Pauli Murray contained more multitudes than most. Pauli Murray's life and story are so vast, so multifaceted, and so deep that even being part of a team of people bringing the story into a documentary film over about a 2-year process, I feel like I barely know or understand. I'm just sort of beginning to understand Pauli Murray's story, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more from those who've been studying Pauli for longer this evening. You know, it was a privilege and an honor to make this film, but a real joy over the weekend as people started to watch on Amazon and you start to hear lines of Pauli Murray's poems that hit people in different ways. The line that seemed to hit many audiences was something from a poem Pauli wrote that was quoted to us from many who watched. Surrender to none the fire of your soul. Pauli Murray had more soul fire than anyone I can remember studying in history classes in school, and never surrendered a single flame of it. Looking forward to the evening and enjoy the trailer.
some people who now argue that you cannot teach American history without teaching about Pauli Murray.
Pauli was a writer, a lawyer, a priest, a poet. Pauli was a feisty woman.
My name is Pauli Murray. My whole history has been a struggle in a society dominated by the ideas that blacks were inferior to whites and women were inferior to men.
Pauli was way ahead of the times.
I chose for my senior paper, should Plessy versus Ferguson be overruled? My little argument went to the Supreme Court.
Y'all see all of the different folks that are in this room? That is made possible by Pauli Murray.
If you rip away everything, oppression is the business of not respecting one's personhood. For my first 2 years, I was the only woman in the law school. They didn't even let me talk.
Thurgood Marshall is talking about Jim Crow, and she says, what I'm experiencing is Jane Crow.
Pauli Murray was not just an amazing lawyer or a badass feminist, but also a queer, non-binary person. Sitting in front of Murray's notes, the turmoil and the suffering, this is a feeling I know well. Scholars who have written about Pauli largely still use feminine pronouns. I don't know what pronouns Pauli would say.
Trans and gender non-binary people have always been a part of our American context. So did y'all just think that your generation invented it?
But if this country is to survive, we must live together in harmony.
Pauli may not have realized they would be a beacon for so many folks.
Pauli's time had not come. We have to work for a world in which it does come.
You say I can't, I'll show you I can, even if I die trying.
As you can see, Pauli Murray was a Renaissance person, talented in many different areas. We have asked 3 esteemed speakers to talk about aspects of Murray's life. Unfortunately, Rashad Robinson could not be with us due to a family matter, so we asked Dr. Nii-Quarterlai to do double duty at the mic as the representative of tonight's sponsor and to elaborate on the impact of Murray as an activist. Dr. Quarterlai is an AARP Senior Advisor and National LGBTQ Liaison, currently on special assignment as the Multicultural Engagement Lead for the AARP COVID-19 Vaccine Education Campaign. He is a lifelong social impact advocate and a friend of the festival for many years standing. He will be immediately followed by Reverend Canon Kelly Brown Douglas. She is an African-American Episcopal priest, womanist theologian, and the inaugural dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary. Another festival favorite, she is also the canon theologian at the Washington National Cathedral and the author of 5 books, including Sexuality in the Black Church, A Womanist Perspective, which was groundbreaking for openly addressing homophobia within the Black church. She will address Murray's accomplishment as the first African-American Episcopal woman priest. The Rev will be followed by Dr. Janet Dewart Bell. The idea for this event was germinated in her living room. When Janet told me that her forthcoming book, Blackbirds Singing, Inspiring Black Women's Speeches from the Civil War to the 21st Century, contained an excerpt from a speech by Murray, I knew this evening had an anchor. Dr. Bell is a communications strategist, social justice advocate, founder of Lead Intergenerational Solutions, and keeper of the flame of her late husband, the renowned Harvard Law professor, author, and scholar, Dewart Bell. She will set the context of the Pauli Murray speech, which is the heart of our performance tonight. Dr. Quartey.
Lord, somebody's calling my name.
Good evening. I know we have our mask on, but we can do better than that. Good evening. On behalf of AARP, I am just thrilled to be here and be in support of the March on Washington Film Festival. Robert, is this the third year, fourth year? Yes. So we got to keep it going. Exactly. It's very fitting that this program is happening today, October 4th, on what is LGBTQ Heritage Month. LGBTQ Heritage Month. I want to thank Robert. I want to thank David, Isasara, and the March on Washington Film Festival team for producing this extraordinary hybrid event. Hard to do. They make it look easy. Let's give them a hand. There is so much that I have in common with Pauli Murray, and then there's absolutely nothing that I have in common with Pauli Murray all at the same time. You know, according to the New York Times, when Pauli Murray died in 1985 at the age of 75, I was 1 year old. And no obituary, no commemoration could contain all of her path-breaking accomplishments. We all know her as a radical and brilliant legal strategist. But did you know that she was named Deputy Attorney General in California? And she was the first black person in that office in 1946? In 1946. Just a year after passing the bar. Who does that? You know who does that? Pauli Murray does that. According to the New Yorker, by the time Pauli Murray learned of her contributions, she was nearing 50. 2/3 of the way through her remarkable life. As a poet, as a writer, as an activist, as a labor organizer, as a legal theorist, as an Episcopal priest. She palled around with Langston Hughes. She joined James Baldwin at the McDowell Colony. The first year it admitted African Americans. She maintained a 23-year friendship with our former First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. She helped Betty Friedan found the National Organization for Women. And along the way, she articulated the intellectual foundation of two of the most important social justice movements of the 20th century. First, when she made her argument for overturning Plessy versus Ferguson, and later when she co-wrote a law review article subsequently used by a rising star at the ACLU, better known as Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ginsburg used that argument to convince the Supreme Court that the Equal Protection Clause applied to women. Pauli Murray was both ahead of her time and behind the scenes. 2 decades before the civil rights movement of the 1960s, she was arrested for refusing to move to the back of the bus in Richmond, Virginia. She organized sit-ins that successfully desegregated restaurants in Washington, D.C. And anticipating the Freedom Summer, she urged her Howard University classmates. Are there any Bisons in here? Oh, yeah, we know. She urged her Howard classmates to head south to fight for civil rights and wondered how to attract young white graduates of the great universities to come down and join them. And 4 decades before another legal scholar, Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, coined the term intersectionality, Pauli Murray insisted on the indivisibility the indivisibility of her identity and experience as an African American, as a worker, her personhood. A few weeks ago, I had an opportunity to watch this film, and bravo to Amazon Studios and Participant Media for investing in and producing this timely documentary. Had an opportunity to see the film with a friend of mine, and it's pretty safe to say we were awestruck by the life and contribution of Pauli Murray, the continued contributions of Pauli Murray. We almost couldn't believe that this was one person's life. One person's extraordinary life. Her story is the story that superhero stories are made from. She continues to be a leader's leader, a pioneer of great consequence, and an unsung American hero. Isa Sara mentioned that our beloved brother in the movement, Rashad Robinson, couldn't be here today. And we send our regards to Rashad. But I'm reminded of something that Rashad often talks about when he is out and about doing the people's work. He makes a distinction between presence versus power. Presence versus power. And sometimes we get a little obsessed about the presence part. We get a little obsessed with the symbolism of things. We get a little obsessed with being a historic first. And we give short shrift sometimes to the hard, back-breaking work of building power. Pauli Murray understood the distinction. Pauli Murray's insatiable curiosity and radical imagination would not allow her to settle with being a historic first. Instead, her curiosity and radical imagination led her to use her mind and typewriter to shape the future one legal argument at a time. So the next time that you walk down a desegregated U Street right here in Washington, D.C., or the next time that you enter a desegregated classroom, or how about the next time that you report to a gender-diverse jury to do your civic duty? Or what if you take pride, just take pride in the fact that LGBTQ employment discrimination is hopefully a relic of the past. Think of Pauli Murray. Think of Pauli Murray and consider what you too are capable of doing with faith, with curiosity, and radical imagination. I know I certainly will. And so enjoy the rest of this program. I often say that love is in the details, and you've got to know this. You've got to know that there's a lot of love that's been put into curating this experience here for you today. I'll be thinking of Pauli Murray, and I hope you will too.
Thank you, Dr. Quartet, and it is always a pleasure and a privilege to be a part of any event that the March on Washington Film Festival curates. I always learn from each event of which I'm a part, so I thank especially Isa Sara for inviting me to be a part of this event tonight, and to Robert Rabin. I am particularly honored and humbled to be a part of this event in which we reflect upon the significance of Pauli Murray, because this I know to be true. While I am not in collar tonight as an Episcopal priest, there would be no collar for me as a Black woman if not for Pauli Murray. To say that I stand on the shoulders and the work of Pauli Murray is an understatement. But Pauli Murray and her significance has lived inside of me for a long time. And I am only beginning to understand just how much and how much she continues to make possible. Pauli Murray was ordained to the Episcopal priesthood on January 8, 1977 at the Washington National Cathedral, thus becoming the first Black woman to become an Episcopal priest. As historically significant as Pauli Murray's ordination was for the Episcopal Church, as well as the global Anglican communion of which the Episcopal Church is a part, it does not capture the profound historical significance of Pauli's priesthood. For Pauli was a priest long before the Episcopal Church recognized that fact in 1977. And it is who she was as a priest that propelled her civil rights, social justice activism, that fueled her refusal to submit to society's binary constructions of human identity, be it racial, ethnic, or gendered sexual binaries, as well as prompted Pauli to enter seminary well before the church consented to the ordination of women. In many respects, Pauli Murray's call to the priesthood serves as an illuminating frame through which to understand her journey, allowing us to appreciate not simply her historical significance, but her importance for us today, and thus why it is important for this wonderful documentary, My Name is Pauli Murray, to have been made, as well as for future films, such as the scripted film of Pauli Murray's life being made by Film Co., as well as many other projects. For to be sure, the fullness of who Pauli Murray was and Pauli's meaning for us cannot be captured in a film, a book, or any singular project. But with that said, let me try to, at least for a moment, point toward her significance as a priest. As I was wrestling with my own call to the Episcopal priesthood in light of opposition that I received from Episcopal clergymen, my mentor and father in the priesthood, Fred Williams, told me, he said, "Kelly, if you are a priest, that is between you and God. For it is God who calls you, not the church. And so whether or not the church ever recognizes that call, it is left to you to live into it." And so it was for Pauli Murray. Pauli lived into that call way before that January 8th, 1977 day at the Washington National Cathedral. Indeed, Pauli perhaps recognized the call to the priesthood even as they did not name it as such. For they poignantly recognized their November 20th, 1910 birth as being significant as it was in the year of Halley's Comet, as well as the day that Leo Tolstoy died, as she said. And to be sure, Pauli never forgot the words that Bishop Delaney, one of the first Black Episcopal bishops, spoke to her on his deathbed, proclaiming Pauli, and I quote, a child of destiny. Perhaps a moment in which the church, in fact, recognized Pauli to be a priest even before it allowed women to be so. And so it was that Pauli would come to recognize, in reflecting back on their activism, that inasmuch as they were fighting the legal and political battles for workers' rights, civil rights, women's rights, and more, that it was they, as Pauli put it, that she was always more concerned with moral and ethical issues than the political and the legal. Thus, Pauli came to realize that they were doing, in Pauli's words, ministry all along. As they were trying to make the world, and I quote Pauli, a true community based upon equality, mutuality, and reciprocity, one, Pauli said, that affirms the richness of individual diversity as well as the common human ties that bind us all together. This vision of a future that affirmed the richness of individual diversity was indeed what compelled Pauli to claim their non-binary being in terms of gender and race. And in so doing, Pauli refused to accept a segregated world, let alone a segregated society, for not only did such a society betray who Pauli was, but it betrayed that transcendent vision of our common human ties. As Pauli said of Pauli's self, I do not regard myself as representative of, I do regard myself as a representative of blended humanity, carrying in my bloodstream, Pauli said, the three great races of humanity: Caucasian, Negroid, and Mongoloid. Quote. And hence, Pauli's fight against segregation, yes, it was political, yes, it was personal, but it was also spiritual. And that Pauli would recognize the realities of Jane Crow, and hence the intersectionality of oppression as it played itself out in the lives and on the bodies of persons like Pauli, was also, yes, grounded in the personal, but also in the spiritual. The point of the matter is that even as we rightfully reflect upon the ways in which Pauli Murray's courageous activism and tremendous contributions from Brown versus the Board of Education to now to the fight for the ERA laid the foundation for a just and equitable nation, we must also rightfully recognize that it was Pauli's priesthood which propelled them, if not sustained them, on this journey. And as such, their significance, inasmuch as it was about changing policies and laws, it was about opening up our moral imaginary of what was possible, opening up our moral imaginary to discover that a world is possible where a Pauli Murray would be able to walk in freedom, and I quote Pauli, proudly before God and man, and to glorify creation through the genius of their unique self-expressions. This was a world that reflected the very God that called Pauli into life, and thus into the priesthood. And so it is no wonder that Pauli Murray's journey would culminate into ordination. For, as Pauli explained, it was an ordination, and I quote, that all of the strands, Pauli said, of my life came together. Descendant of slaver and of slaveholder, I had already been called poet, lawyer, teacher, and friend. Now I was empowered, Pauli said, to minister the sacrament of one in whom there is no north or south, no black or white, no male or female, only the spirit of love and reconciliation, drawing us all toward the goal of human wholeness. And so what is the significance of Pauli Murray's priesthood? It is that as a priest, Pauli expanded our moral imagination to envision a society, yea, a world, where in fact there are no binaries of first and last, because all are treated equally as the sacred creations that they are. Thank you.
Good evening. I first want to thank Robert Rabin and the staff at the March on Washington Film Festival and the goddess herself, Isisara Bey. I am deeply humbled and honored to be here tonight, and I want to tell you a little bit about my forthcoming book, Blackbirds Singing, before I talk about Pauli Murray, the reason we're here tonight. On October 7th, 2020, you may remember the vice presidential debate, where Kamala Harris emphatically said to the then vice president, the former one, "I am speaking, Mr. Vice President." What she said resonated with women who have been cut off, but especially with African American women who've had to deal with mansplaining and being ignored. We've experienced it all before and have been fighting to be heard. Pauli Murray fought to be heard. The book Blackbirds Singing talks about speeches of African American women. We didn't always call ourselves that, from the Civil War to the 21st century. And even as we have moved forward and we have tried to fulfill part of the vision and the prophecy of Pauli Murray, we have tried to negotiate the public square, the public space. Often, however, we are talking into the wind. But times sometimes are changing, and we will force them to change. And nothing is more powerful than words and vision and passion. That's what we have. And while she might not have thought about this, our young poet, Amanda Gorman, when she was doing her inaugural poem, The Hill We Climb, she captured the spirit and legacy from the darkest hours Black women have fought to be heard. She said, "The new dawn blooms as the free, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it. If only we are brave enough to be it." I first heard of Pauli Murray through a mutual friend, that Eric Springer, who is the son of Maida Springer Kemp, who is a great friend of Pauli Murray, and with whom Pauli Murray spent some of her last days. And I was fascinated at this great woman who I shamefully had not really heard about or had appreciated. And I call myself an academic and a scholar. And what I do is I research Black women, so I did not appreciate the full range of Pauli Murray. That was then, this is now. So let me say this. What I think about Pauli Murray is that she is a Rosetta Stone. Without her, we could not have the clarity and the conviction of how we look at things intersectionally, whether race, gender, sexual identity. Absolutely incredible to be ahead of her time, and still, in many ways, ahead of her time. I do not say, maybe because it's difficult for me to get all the initials out, LGBTQ. What I say, and I want y'all to join me with this, I say gay and non-gay. I want to change the dialogue because I do not want to privilege people who think they are, quote, straight. So that's my new thing. There are other people I consider Rosetta Stones. They include Anna Julia Cooper, Voice from the South, the great Myrlie Evers, who is aging now. Don't let her die without us giving the appreciation she deserves while she's alive. And then, of course, I have to lift up the Fannie Lou Hamer. So we've heard tonight that Pauli Murray was a Renaissance person by any standards. She was brilliant, complex, a prolific writer. What we have to remember, though, is that she was also a human being, and she had moments of doubt and loneliness. But she could reach out when she was at that MacDonald colony with James Baldwin and realize that James Baldwin lost track of time, sort of like my late husband, Dewart Bell. And so she would knock on his door and make sure that he would eat so that he would be nourished. She was also a great friend of Lorraine Hansberry. Are we noticing a pattern here? Okay. You've heard about what she's done. She wasn't just a founder of the National Organization for Women. She was the idea of the National Organization for Women because she wanted to have an NAACP for women. There is a great story about this in a book called Jane Crow by the great scholar Rosalind Rosenberg. And so you should, as a movement person, I always say that what's important is how we share and how we bring other people into the conversation. That's how movements succeed. That's how we move forward. So read that book. Don't just read mine, but please read mine. But read Jane Crow by Rosalind Rosenberg. You know, John F. Kennedy said about Thomas Jefferson, no booze there, that when he was at the White House, when he dined, that this greatest, he talked about a dinner of the greatest collection of talent and human knowledge, except when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. The greatest talent and human knowledge, with the possible exception of when Pauli Murray dined alone. Other people I'd like to bring up who talk about particularly African American women in the past are, since I'm movement oriented, and that's to me is what the March on Washington and the March on Washington Film Festival are about. I'd like to mention historians Dr. Darlene Clark Hine, Patricia Hill Collins, and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. A couple other things I would like to say that from the chapter in my book, Blackbirds Singing, it's taken, I have in there her speech, Pauli Murray's speech at the National Negro Women Conference in 1963. And part of it she talks about in the human rights battle, America has seen the image of the Negro evolving through many women. She said then, and she would probably be disappointed that we have not evolved further than we have, that these are images that have touched America's heart. Pauli Murray was a hopeful person. You know, she was a biracial person who tried to, when she was younger, get testosterone. She always thought of herself as male. She changed her name to Pauli. It was not always Pauli. And so she was just incredible. Can you imagine a young woman at that time recognizing not only who she was, but who she wanted to be, and to give courage to other people who were like she was? I just think she's just the most incredible person. And she talked about the disappointments, for example, at the March on Washington, where women were not given speaking engagements at the main stage. And, you know, it was probably more sad. She was probably more sad than angry. But I can be angry, and I can push that kind of thing will never happen again. She says about Negro women, that's the term, all too often, and I'm paraphrasing here, we find ourselves rebuffed. However, we have to march on. That's definitely a paraphrase there. So the legacy of Pauli Murray is one of courage and love, determination, forcefulness, someone who understood and who reached for her destiny, who grasped that destiny and left us much richer because she walked this earth. So in honor of Pauli Murray and the March on Washington Film Festival, may I just say this. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. Thank you, and God bless you.
Now he sleeps 6 feet in the ground. I said, well, Lord, somebody's calling my name.
So thank you, all three of you, for bringing life to the depth and contributions of Pauli Murray. And now we are at the portion of the evening where our streams on social media will end. We thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to see the live performance that's about to happen, go to our website, marchonwashingtonfilmfestival.org, secure a pass for the stream on Eventive, and click and join us. And remember, it will be there until October 11th. Once we had the script, we were fortunate to find Regina Victor to bring it to life. Regina is a multidisciplinary artist and the artistic director of Sideshow Theater. They have helped develop the world premieres of artists like Anna Devere Smith, collaborated with Steppenwolf Theater and the Berkeley Repertory Theater, among others, and written for Playbill and American Theater. My thanks to actor Nicole Salter for bringing Regina to our attention. The